The most dangerous thing about Unforgiven is not the violence it shows, but the violence it refuses to excuse. Released in 1992, this film arrived disguised as a final Western, a quiet farewell to an old genre. But beneath that surface, it carried a far more troubling reckoning. According to production records and interviews, Unforgiven was shaped by decades of regret, moral exhaustion, and unresolved questions about what the Western had taught audiences to admire. Its silences weigh heavier than its gunshots. Its heroes arrive already broken. Its justice feels delayed, compromised, and stained. Nothing here is clean, and nothing is meant to be. What Unforgiven ultimately asks is not whether violence is justified, but what remains of a man after he has justified it too many times. And once that question is asked, there is no way to look away. Number 1. The screenplay that became Unforgiven did not originate in triumph, but in delay. Written by David Webb, Peoples in the late 1970 seconds, it circulated for more than a decade without being produced. According to Peoples' own accounts, studios hesitated because the script offered no comforting center. It dismantled the moral arithmetic that had sustained Westerns for generations. Killings were not redemptive. Reputation was not honor. Survival carried no halo. For years, the project remained dormant, waiting for a moment when audiences and a leading actor might be ready to confront what it implied. When Clint Eastwood finally committed to the film, he did so with an unusual condition. He wanted to wait until he was older. This decision, documented in interviews from the period, was not cosmetic. Age would not soften the story, it would expose it. The protagonist's frailty was not a character flaw to be overcome, but the point itself. Violence would no longer belong to youth, speed, or confidence. It would belong to memory and consequence. The long delay was not an accident of financing. It was a moral hesitation shared by an industry unsure whether audiences wanted truth over legend. By the time the film was made, that hesitation had become part of the film's DNA. Unforgiven does not feel discovered. It feels finally admitted. Number 2. By 1992, Clint Eastwood's screen persona was already a historical artifact. For decades, he had embodied Western authority, the man who acted decisively when institutions failed. Yet, Unforgiven was conceived as a quiet repudiation of that image. Eastwood did not approach the role as a return to form, but as a confrontation with it. In interviews surrounding the film's release, he acknowledged an awareness that his earlier characters rarely paused to reckon with the aftermath of their actions. This awareness shaped the performance in subtle ways. The character's physical awkwardness, documented in rehearsal notes and production commentary, was intentional. He mounts horses poorly. He stumbles. He coughs. These details are not naturalistic flourishes. They are indictments. The body remembers what the myth tries to forget. According to Eastwood, the goal was to let the audience feel time pressing down on a man who once moved effortlessly through violence. What makes this unsettling is not nostalgia, but recognition. Viewers familiar with Eastwood's earlier Westerns are forced into a moral echo chamber. The same face now carries exhaustion instead of certainty. The same posture now suggests avoidance rather than command. Unforgiven does not erase Eastwood's legacy. It interrogates it. The result is not self-criticism framed as humility. It is something colder, a suggestion that charisma, once spent, leaves a residue that cannot be redeemed. Number 3. Alcoholism in Unforgiven is not a character detail. It is a structural element. According to both the screenplay and Eastwood's later reflections, the decision to make the central figure a recovering alcoholic was meant to strip violence of its romantic clarity. When the character abstains, he hesitates. When he drinks, the past returns not as skill, but as reflex. This portrayal drew from historical accounts of frontier life that rarely made it into classic Westerns. Memoirs from the 19th century frequently describe alcohol as a coping mechanism among men whose livelihoods depended on killing, whether animals or people. People's script reflects this reality without moral commentary. Drinking does not create violence, nor does sobriety cure it. Both states coexist uneasily with memory. What is often overlooked is how the film associates alcohol with storytelling itself. Legends flow most freely in saloons. Exaggerations gain volume as restraint dissolves. In this context, intoxication becomes a metaphor for myth-making. The more a man drinks, the larger his reputation grows, until it eclipses the truth. The cost of this cycle is not only physical. The film suggests that moral judgment becomes blurred long before vision does. Alcohol does not excuse what follows, but it reveals how easily self-deception takes hold. In Unforgiven, sobriety is not salvation. It is merely the moment when the weight becomes harder to avoid. Number 4. Violence in Unforgiven unfolds slowly, often awkwardly, and rarely cleanly. This was not an aesthetic choice driven by realism alone. Production notes and interviews confirm that Eastwood deliberately resisted the visual language of quick-draw heroics. Gunfights were staged to feel uncertain, confused, and irreversible. Missed shots matter. Screams linger. Death arrives without choreography. This approach was influenced by historical research into actual frontier gun violence, which suggests that most encounters were chaotic and brief, not elegant tests of skill. The film reflects this without lecturing. There is no montage of expertise, no musical cue to elevate the moment. The camera often holds back, as if unwilling to participate. What makes this disturbing is how the film denies the viewer emotional distance. Violence is not framed as spectacle, but as interruption. Lives do not arc toward meaning. They stop. The film's restraint forces attention onto aftermath, rather than action. Bodies remain where they fall. Silence replaces triumph. This refusal to aestheticize violence carries a consequence for the audience. Viewers accustomed to Western grammar are left without orientation. There is no catharsis to lean on. What remains is discomfort, a recognition that the genre's traditional pleasures depended on omission. Unforgiven restores what had been edited out, and the restoration is not generous. Number 5. Authority in Unforgiven is not corrupt in the conventional sense. It is methodical. The figure of law enforcement is portrayed as disciplined, articulate, and deeply convinced of his own righteousness. According to historical commentary surrounding the film, this characterization was influenced by records of frontier sheriffs who maintained order through brutality while sincerely believing they were preventing chaos. The unsettling element is not the abuse of power, but its rationalization. Rules are enforced selectively, and violence is framed as pedagogy. Pain becomes a lesson. The film does not suggest that this authority is exceptional. It implies that it is efficient. Order is maintained. The town functions. What complicates this portrayal is the absence of overt sadism. The cruelty is procedural. This aligns with documented historical patterns, where frontier justice often prioritized deterrence over fairness. In this context, morality becomes administrative. The question is not what is right, but what is effective. The cost of this system is borne quietly. There are no memorials for those disciplined out of existence. Their absence becomes the evidence of success. Unforgiven does not argue against authority by depicting chaos. It argues by showing order achieved at an unspoken price. The result is not outrage, but unease. The film suggests that some forms of peace are indistinguishable from suppression, and that history often records them simply as stability. Number 6. Reputation in Unforgiven operates independently of truth. Characters speak of past deeds with certainty, yet those deeds remain unseen, distorted by distance and retelling. This narrative choice reflects documented patterns in frontier history, where reputation often mattered more than record. In communities with limited documentation, stories functioned as currency. A man's past was what others believed it to be. David Webb Peoples' script intentionally withholds verification. Accounts of earlier violence are contradictory, incomplete, or secondhand. According to interviews, this was meant to unsettle the audience's instinct to anchor morality in legend. The film never confirms whether the most infamous acts actually occurred as described. What matters is that they are believed, and belief shapes behavior. The human cost of this system is subtle. Men are forced to live up to stories they may no longer recognize as their own. Others are punished for reputations they cannot escape. Violence becomes self-perpetuating, not because of necessity, but because narrative expectation demands it. In this world, truth has little corrective power. A story once spoken cannot be retrieved. Unforgiven suggests that legends do not merely exaggerate history, they trap it, freezing human beings inside versions of themselves that no longer exist. Number 7. The role of the journalist in Unforgiven is neither neutral nor malicious. It is complicit through curiosity. According to production commentary, this character was inspired by 19th-century dime novel writers who traveled west to collect stories, often embellishing them for distant readers. Their presence shaped how violence was remembered and sold. In the film, the journalist listens carefully, records eagerly, and rarely intervenes. His questions encourage performance. Men speak differently when they know they are being documented. Bravado increases, doubt disappears. What might have remained private regret becomes public narrative. This dynamic carries an ethical tension rarely addressed in Westerns. The act of witnessing is not passive. By preserving certain stories and ignoring others, the journalist helps decide what endures. Pain becomes material, death becomes anecdote. Historical records suggest that many frontier figures became famous not because of their actions, but because someone chose to write about them. Unforgiven reflects this reality without condemnation. The journalist is not villainous. He is efficient. He does his job. The cost is deferred. Long after the blood dries, the stories remain, stripped of context and consequence. What survives is not the weight of the act, but its outline. Number 8. Women in Unforgiven occupy little screen time, yet their presence defines the moral perimeter of the story. This is consistent with historical patterns in Western narratives, where women often appeared only as catalysts. According to scholarly analyses of frontier communities, women's labor and suffering were frequently marginalized in official accounts, despite being central to survival. The violence that sets the plot in motion is not sensationalized. It is treated as an offense against order, rather than an emotional rupture. This framing mirrors documented legal responses in frontier towns, where harm to women was often addressed in transactional terms rather than moral ones. What is uncomfortable is the restraint. The film does not invite empathy through prolonged focus. Instead, it shows how quickly the incident is absorbed into negotiation, rumor, and retribution. The original harm recedes, replaced by competing claims over compensation and authority. This absence is the point. The film reflects a historical silence rather than correcting it. Women are not centered because they were rarely centered. Their marginalization is not dramatized, it is assumed. The lasting consequence is not resolution, but erasure. Unforgiven suggests that many frontier stories began with women suffering and ended without their voices ever entering the record. Number 9. Aging in Unforgiven is not symbolic, it is logistical. The bodies on screen move slowly because time has altered their capacity, not their intent. According to Eastwood, this was essential to the film's honesty. Violence does not disappear with age. It simply becomes harder to perform. Historical accounts of aging gunmen are rare, largely because many did not survive long enough to age publicly. Those who did often transitioned into quieter roles or disappeared from record. The film imagines what history rarely documented, what it costs to carry a violent past into physical decline. This decline strips away illusion. When strength fades, what remains is motive. The film forces viewers to confront violence without the excuse of youthful impulse. Decisions are deliberate. Hesitation is visible. Consequences feel heavier. The ethical tension lies in persistence. If a man can no longer fight easily, why does he continue? The film offers no psychological explanation. It implies habit, expectation, and unfinished identity. In this sense, aging becomes a form of exposure. The myth survives longer than the body, and the gap between them grows increasingly painful to ignore. Number 10. Silence in Unforgiven functions as testimony. Extended pauses, unfinished sentences, and withheld reactions are not cinematic affectations. According to production interviews, these moments were left intact to resist narrative momentum. The film refuses to hurry past moral uncertainty. This silence contrasts sharply with traditional Western dialogue, which often use speech to assert dominance or clarity. Here, words fail. Characters speak around their past rather than through it. When they do speak plainly, it is often too late to change anything. Historically, silence played a similar role in frontier communities. Records indicate that many acts of violence were never discussed openly, either out of fear or resignation. Absence of speech became a form of consensus. The cost of silence is ambiguity. Without explanation, actions linger unresolved. The film does not clarify motives or assign final judgments. It allows discomfort to remain unprocessed. This restraint challenges the audience more than explicit condemnation would. Viewers are left alone with what they have seen. Unforgiven suggests that some truths lose their power when explained, and that silence may be the most accurate record of all. Number 11. Justice in Unforgiven is negotiated rather than declared. According to historical research into frontier legal systems, formal law often functioned as a framework for bargaining, not moral judgment. Fines replaced accountability, agreements substituted for truth. The film reflects this reality with unsettling precision. What is rarely noted is how justice becomes detached from the original harm. As negotiations unfold, the initial act that demanded response fades into abstraction. What remains are numbers, reputations, and enforcement mechanisms. The injured party becomes symbolic rather than present. This shift mirrors documented cases in 19th century towns, where outcomes often depended on who held authority rather than who suffered most. The law protected order, not individuals. Unforgiven does not dramatize this as corruption. It presents it as routine. The ethical tension lies in efficiency. Justice works smoothly when stripped of empathy. Decisions are easier when human cost is minimized or removed from sight. The film offers no corrective to this system. It simply observes it. What lingers is the sense that justice, once procedural, ceases to be moral. It becomes maintenance. And maintenance rarely concerns itself with memory. Number 12. Fear in Unforgiven is quiet and anticipatory. It does not announce itself with music or spectacle. According to Eastwood's direction notes, fear was meant to precede violence rather than accompany it. Characters live in expectation of harm, not its immediate presence. This reflects historical accounts from frontier settlements, where threats were often indirect and delayed. Violence was rumored long before it occurred. Anticipation shaped behavior more effectively than action. Men adjusted their movements, speech, and alliances based on what might happen. The film captures this atmosphere through restraint. Conversations stop short. Eyes linger. Decisions are postponed. Fear becomes environmental rather than episodic. It saturates daily life without erupting. The human cost is cumulative. Living under constant anticipation erodes clarity. Choices become defensive. Morality narrows to survival. Unforgiven suggests that fear does not merely precede violence, it prepares the ground for it. When violence finally arrives, it feels almost secondary. The damage has already been done in the waiting. Number 13. Masculinity in Unforgiven is portrayed as obligation rather than identity. Men perform toughness not because it defines them, but because deviation carries risk. According to sociological studies of frontier culture, masculinity was enforced through reputation and peer expectation, leaving little room for refusal. The film reflects this pressure subtly. Men speak of what must be done, not what they wish to do. Reluctance is framed as weakness. Silence becomes a shield against scrutiny. Violence persists not through desire, but through duty. This portrayal complicates traditional Western heroism. Courage is not celebrated, it is demanded. Those who hesitate are marked, those who comply are damaged. The film offers no alternative model of masculinity, only its cost. What is unsettling is the absence of critique within the world itself. The characters do not question the system openly, they navigate it. The audience is left to observe without guidance. The lasting consequence is exhaustion. Masculinity, stripped of choice, becomes labor. And like all labor performed without belief, it leaves little behind except fatigue. Number 14. Memory in Unforgiven is unreliable by design. Characters recall past events with confidence that is never confirmed. According to Peoples, this ambiguity was intentional, reflecting the way frontier history often survives through inconsistent testimony rather than record. This instability undermines the authority of recollection. Memories justify actions, but they do not resolve them. Each retelling shifts emphasis, altering responsibility and meaning. The past becomes malleable, shaped by present need. Historical scholarship supports this portrayal. Many Western figures are known primarily through conflicting accounts, with little archival certainty. Unforgiven adopts this uncertainty rather than correcting it. The ethical tension lies in consequence without clarity. Men act on memories that may be false, exaggerated, or incomplete. Yet the outcomes are real. Blood does not require accurate recollection to be spilled. The film suggests that memory's power lies not in truth, but in persistence. What is remembered accurately or not governs behavior long after facts have faded. Number 15. Death in Unforgiven is not redemptive. It resolves nothing. According to Eastwood's interviews, the film deliberately avoids framing death as narrative closure. Lives end, but meanings do not crystallize around them. This reflects historical realities of frontier mortality, where deaths were frequent and often unremarked. Records list names without context, causes without reflection. The film mirrors this absence of ceremony. What distinguishes Unforgiven is its refusal to assign symbolic value to death. There is no sense that sacrifice cleanses the past or corrects imbalance. Death simply removes a presence. The human cost is emotional vacancy. Survivors are left without explanation or relief. Grief is muted, practical, and unresolved. The film does not offer mourning as spectacle. In this world, death is not a turning point. It is a subtraction, and subtraction, repeated enough times, leaves a landscape thinner than before. Number 16. Power in Unforgiven does not announce itself through dominance, but through endurance. Those who hold it do so not because they are strongest, but because they remain standing when others do not. According to historical analyses of frontier authority, power often accrued to individuals willing to persist through moral compromise, rather than those driven by ideology. The film reflects this dynamic quietly. Control is exercised through repetition, not spectacle. Punishments are consistent. Resistance is discouraged through predictability. Over time, opposition exhausts itself. What is unsettling is how ordinary this becomes. Power does not need to justify itself when it has already shaped expectations. The town adapts. Violence becomes background noise. Stability is mistaken for legitimacy. The human cost is normalization. When endurance replaces justice, suffering loses urgency. The film does not depict rebellion because history suggests it was rare. Most people adjusted. Unforgiven implies that power's most effective weapon is not fear, but fatigue. Number 17. Redemption in Unforgiven is deliberately absent. According to Eastwood, the film was never intended to offer moral recovery. Actions carry weight, but they do not cleanse. This choice runs counter to decades of Western storytelling, where final acts often restored balance. Here, balance is never achieved. Attempts at change are incomplete and fragile. The past remains active, influencing behavior regardless of intent. Redemption, if it exists, is private and unverifiable. Historical records of violent frontier figures rarely document transformation. More often, they note cessation, disappearance, death, or withdrawal. The film mirrors this pattern. The ethical tension lies in expectation. Audiences are conditioned to look for moral resolution. Unforgiven withholds it, suggesting that some lives do not arc toward meaning. They simply accumulate consequence. What remains is not forgiveness, but continuation, and continuation offers no comfort. Number 18. Community in Unforgiven functions through consensus, not conscience. According to sociological studies of frontier towns, communal survival often depended on unspoken agreements rather than shared values. Silence served cohesion better than debate. The film portrays this without commentary. Townspeople observe, adapt, and comply. Outrage is rare. Intervention rarer still. Survival depends on alignment with prevailing authority. The cost of this cohesion is moral dilution. Responsibility disperses until it disappears. No single individual feels accountable. Harm becomes collective and therefore unclaimed. This structure protects the group while isolating the individual. Those who suffer do so alone. Those who benefit do so quietly. Unforgiven suggests that communities can function efficiently while abandoning ethical responsibility entirely. Order persists, justice does not. Number 19. Legacy in Unforgiven is shaped after the fact. According to historical precedent, many Western figures were remembered differently than they lived, their stories refined by distance and narrative need. The film anticipates this distortion. Characters speculate about how events will be remembered even as they unfold. Reputation is managed. Accounts are prepared. The future audience is imagined. This awareness alters behavior. Actions are taken not only for immediate effect, but for their eventual telling. Violence becomes performance. The human cost is temporal. Lives are lived with an eye toward memory rather than presence. Authenticity erodes. What matters is not what happened, but what will be said. The film implies that legacy is less about truth than convenience. History remembers what fits. Number 20. The final violence in Unforgiven is not presented as climax, but as inevitability. According to Eastwood, the ending was designed to feel heavy rather than triumphant. Nothing is resolved. Everything is confirmed. What has been implied throughout becomes explicit. Violence answers nothing. It only concludes conversation. The film refuses to frame this moment as justice or revenge. It is simply an ending. Historical accounts of frontier violence often end similarly, with abrupt cessation and little reflection. The film adopts this structure faithfully. The ethical weight lies in recognition. By the end, there are no illusions left to dismantle. Only consequences remain. Unforgiven does not ask the viewer to agree. It asks them to remember. The most unsettling truth about Unforgiven is that it was never intended to be a Western at all. According to David Webb Peoples, the script was written as an anti-myth, a story that could only exist after the genre had exhausted its moral authority. It waited because it had to. Earlier decades would have absorbed it as variation. Only after generations of repetition could its silence be heard. What this reframes is not the film's violence, but its timing. Unforgiven arrives after the legends have already done their work. The audience brings decades of inherited assumptions into the viewing experience about justice, masculinity, authority, and deserved violence. The film does not dismantle those assumptions directly. It lets them collapse under their own weight. In this sense, Unforgiven is not a critique of the Old West, but of the stories told about it. The danger it exposes is not historical brutality, but narrative inheritance. According to cultural historians, myths rarely disappear when disproven. They persist through familiarity, not belief. The film offers no counter-legend. It provides no replacement hero, no corrected myth. It simply stops speaking where the genre once explained itself most loudly. What remains is a void where certainty used to be, and that void does not accuse. It does not persuade. It waits. And in that waiting, there is nothing left to say.